Hello and welcome. I'm Jono Hayes and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. And these are our top stories. The French President Emmanuel Macron says security guarantees for Ukraine are ready. That's following a crucial coalition of the willing meeting with Zelenskyy in Paris. The number of people killed in a funicular tram crash in Lisbon rises to 16 as Portugal declares a day of mourning. And Lisbon's mayor says the city needs answers. Plus, pressure on the UK's Deputy Prime Minister to resign mounts over a tax error as she fights for her political future. To our top story, the French President Emmanuel Macron has said security guarantees for Ukraine are ready after a hosting of the Coalition of the Willing meeting in Paris with President Zelenskyy today. The Ukraine leader has also said the US should be part of security guarantees. He also said he's discussed putting pressure on Russia during a call with Donald Trump. Now, for more on this story, we're joined by our correspondent, Ross Cullen, who is in Paris. Ross, thanks for joining us. Zelenskyy saying that Russia is rejecting any actual peace initiative. How is that shaping the mood and the urgency inside the summit there?
Yeah, that's right, Jono. We had the summit drawing to a close just a short time ago in the building. You can see behind me, that's the Élysée Palace here in the French capital, the French presidential office and residence, and that is where Volodymyr Zelenskyy was in person, along with many of the dignitaries, Ursula von der Leyen from the EU, Mark Rutte from NATO. The British Prime Minister was the co-chair, along with Emmanuel Macron. Steve Witkoff, US Special Envoy, also here in Paris. And really the mood was trying to bring back that momentum and try to regain the momentum after the European leaders met Donald Trump in last month in the White House, after he himself met Vladimir Putin in Alaska on the 15th of August. So certainly urgency and momentum, really trying to put the ball back in Russia's court to force Moscow to agree to a ceasefire.
And more about that, we also heard Emmanuel Macron saying that further sanctions could be on the cards from the Trump administration. That's if Russia refuses to talk. Ross, how united are the EU and Washington on this front?
Yeah, that is one of the points that's important to note. Steve Witkoff here for coordination between Washington and Paris on behalf of all of Ukraine's other Western allies. And they range from across the EU to Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand as well, rowing in behind Emmanuel Macron to support Ukraine now and also after the war has come to a conclusion. And it was interesting to note that there was a call with Donald Trump after the morning of meetings here with the US leader to ensure that he was kept up to speed with the latest thinking here in Europe in terms of security guarantees, but also get that agreement, as you point out, Jono, that there will be an increase in sanctions by Washington and by the European Union if Russia does not move in the coming days towards agreeing a bilateral summit, that much discussed bilateral summit between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
Zelenskyy also stating as well in the last hour or so that the US has to provide these security guarantees, and Emmanuel Macron has said that the US needs to be very clear on their stance with regards to this. So what is the feeling fresh on the feet of that announcement and that speech earlier on? What is the feeling in Paris about America's role in all of this?
Well, European allies got the chance, Jono, to ask Steve Witkoff directly. The US Special Envoy has visited Moscow and St. Petersburg so far this year to speak directly to Vladimir Putin to try to ensure that coordination is continuing as much as possible. That Washington-Moscow dialogue is open, and he was here as well to answer questions from the Europeans, to put forward as well the US point of view to ensure that the designing of the US security architecture can be done in concert with Ukraine's other allies. And Emmanuel Macron did say earlier in his closing news conference that we will expect a final announcement a precision of how the US security guarantee will look in the next couple of days or so. We know that the European security guarantees will be the deployment of troops inside Ukraine. Some 26 nations have agreed to deploy their soldiers the day after a peace agreement is signed. What the Europeans see as critical and what Ukraine sees as crucial as well is that there is the US participation in that security guarantee framework to deter any future Russian aggression.
I just want to very quickly circle back to that, Ross. You mentioned the countries that are ready to send in those troops to strengthen Ukraine's defence. How credible and concrete are those commitments? Anybody else talking about that in Paris at the moment?
Yeah, Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer, so France and the UK have been in the vanguard of this, but the French president saying there are 24 other countries who are joining France and the UK with a commitment to send in soldiers once a peace agreement is signed for a reassurance force. The French president saying it will be not to go to war with Russia, but to be there to dissuade Russia and to support Ukraine on the land, in the air and also at sea. The deployment of coalition warships potentially to Ukrainian waters to protect Ukrainian ports, and that reassurance force. What we did have from Emmanuel Macron, though, is no official announcement of the geography of where it will be in Ukraine. The deployments of the soldiers won't be on the front line, he said, but they will be in Ukraine, without going into further specifics. But that also a major movement from the French president to announce that more than 20 nations have now signed up to deploy their troops inside Ukraine once a peace agreement is signed. Jono?
Even before we had the discussion and the summit today, we'd heard of Russia's reaction, and Putin had warned and again reiterated that he'll achieve his aims through military force. So how is that shaping up the discussions, and what influence has that actually had on the meeting that we've seen today?
Well, both from the discussions with the US, which happened this afternoon, and the discussions beforehand this morning between mostly the Europeans and other Western allies, they really feel that they want to force Moscow to move urgently in the coming days to agree to that bilateral summit, or else face sanctions, or at the very least move in the direction of a peace framework. Vladimir Putin has offered to host a conference with Volodymyr Zelenskyy in Moscow. That's an absolute non-starter for Ukraine for a whole range of different reasons, but Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has said he's willing to meet in neutral Switzerland or Austria or Turkey as well for that discussion. Russia did have that meeting with North Korea, President Putin and Kim Jong-un in Beijing on Wednesday, just showing the close coordination there between those nations, and they also appeared publicly with Xi Jinping. So today was a chance for Ukraine's European allies to come together and show that they are also standing fully square behind their ally.
Ross Cullen, live in Paris. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to continue this conversation. We're joined from Vienna by Franak Viacorka, the Chief of Staff to Belarus's opposition leader. First of all, let's talk about President Zelenskyy. He's saying everyone agrees that Russia is rejecting any peace initiative. Now, from your perspective in Belarus, how do you read Moscow's continued refusal to engage here?
Just Putin doesn't want peace. Putin is interested to continue war so long as possible, because the war, it fuels the regime, it gives him money, it justifies repression. And I don't see any reason for Putin to stop the war right now, because economy, let's take economy, it's growing only because the war continues. So all these games with Trump by Putin, I see as the teasing time, winning time, but there is no real intention to achieve the peace deal or ceasefire.
Franak, Macron and, of course, the other leaders today at the summit talking about these new sanctions with the US if Russia holds out and doesn't come to the negotiating table. Do you believe that tougher sanctions are realistically going to change Vladimir Putin's stance?
American sanctions can be imposed, but Trump is hesitating. He thinks that he still can make a deal with Putin. If Lindsey Graham's proposal in the US Congress about the 500% tariffs will be accepted, will be adopted, it will be a huge blow on Russian economy, on Russian war machine. But so far, nothing has happened. And also, America has such tool as a secondary sanctions on all the governments, all the countries which are buying Russian products. Still, this tool is available but not used. And European sanctions. Europeans can really use the oil price cap. So far, it's not used in full, but if it will be done, if the price of oil will be reduced, of course, it will be hit and blow on Putin. And as Trump mentioned in the conversation with Zelenskyy, still many European countries are buying Russian oil. And this is something which is fueling the Russian war machine too.
We mentioned with Ross just a moment ago, but he spoke about some countries being ready to send troops and they're going to strengthen Ukraine's air defense. How do these moves affect Belarus, given your close alignment with Moscow?
Lukashenko's regime in Belarus is closely connected to Putin. And as weaker Russia is, weaker Lukashenko is in Belarus. And if Ukraine wins, if Ukraine succeeds, if war stops, it will be the opening for us. And the new wave of protests, even the new wave of revolution, which started 5 years ago, can take place. So we are looking at these developments with a big hope that Ukraine will be supported, that Ukraine will receive all the security guarantees. If it happens, then Ukraine can play much a bigger role for Belarus too. Just imagine there is a peace, there is ceasefire, Ukraine is stabilizing, and then it can conduct the proactive foreign policy inside Belarus too.
Franak, you did touch on this a little while ago, and Zelenskyy has said that he's raised pressure on Russia during that call with Donald Trump. What role do you actually see Washington, particularly the Trump administration, playing in shaping the outcome here of this war?
Crucial role. And the position of Trump will decide on many things, maybe on everything. If Trump will take tough position on Putin from the very beginning, the war would probably have ended already. But these attempts to appease Putin, to play with Putin, to make a deal with him, it only bring new victims in Ukraine. But I think that this understanding to Trump is coming. It's coming to American administration, to American Congress, and we see the rhetoric has changed, and Trump is getting more and more anti-Russian, more and more aggressive in his attitude towards Putin. And I think very soon we will see a different Trump, different from the one we saw in the beginning of his presidential term.
So the coalition of the willing have been discussing this extensive military plan, the security guarantees from the US as well. Do you think this summit is actually going to be a real turning point for Ukraine? And for countries like Belarus who are watching so closely, what's your overall opinion?
I think it's President Zelensky's big success to create such a powerful and broad coalition and gather everyone together and receive their agreement to send troops. This is a very powerful message to Putin. Putin is not happy. Putin's spokesperson already mentioned that this is not security, it's insecurity guarantees. Russia is afraid of having troops in Ukraine, but also Lukashenko. Lukashenko in Belarus, who is fully dependent on Russia, he realizes if Europeans and Americans will be in Ukraine, if Ukraine will be successful on the way of reforms and European integration, NATO integration, Belarusian society will get inspired too. And the coup, the protest, the revolution can happen in Belarus too, because Belarusians, they want Europe. They don't want to be part of Russia. And I think this, all Belarusian population is watching Ukraine right now with a big, big hope and optimism.
What are you expecting, Franak, President Trump to do right now, given this fresh summit, given the fresh calls on him to have some intervention here? What were you expecting, or what would you like to see the Trump administration do in order to see some real change here?
First of all, to provide Ukraine with weapons, with all the stuff Ukraine needs right now to stop Russian invasion. Second, to put pressure on Putin, impose tariffs, impose sanctions, isolate Putin, do not play these games in appeasement, and also to reunite with European partners, because transatlantic unity is key. If we want to stop Russian aggression in Europe, it's important Washington, Brussels, and all European capitals working together on that.
We're already hearing as well from some EU parties that there may be some cracks forming in this so far. Not everyone is united in saying that they will support and get behind Ukraine, and that due to historical ties, perhaps, as we've heard before. Do you think that this could jeopardise it in some way and jeopardise these deals that we're seeing being handled at the moment?
Of course it can jeopardize. Of course, everything might happen. No one can predict what will happen next week or next month. The only thing which is stable and clear that Russia, with the help of Lukashenko in Belarus, they will not stop. And even if they will get any ceasefire right now, they will just use this time to prepare for another war. And the next victim could be not Ukraine, not Belarus, but Baltic states. And of course, Russians are using their allies within European Union and also in America to lobby for giving up Ukraine. And here we have to explain that this is not only about Ukraine and Russia, this is about fight between democracy and tyranny.
Franak Viacorka, there we must leave it, but thank you so much for joining us. Portugal is in mourning after a tragic crash involving Lisbon's historic Gloria funicular killed 16 people, while more than 20 others have been injured. The 140-year-old cable car derailed and slammed into a building near Liberty Avenue, trapping several passengers. Officials say that foreign nationals are among the victims, and investigators are trying to determine what caused the disaster, as Lisbon's mayor says that the city needs answers. Here's more of what he had to say alongside the Portuguese Prime Minister at a press conference that took place earlier today.
This is one of the greatest human tragedies in our recent history. The immediate priority was to rescue the victims. The authorities will quickly carry out the necessary investigations to determine the cause of this tragic accident, including the Office for the Prevention and Investigation of Aircraft Accidents and Judicial Police, which has been involved from the outset.
Anything that can be said at the moment is mere speculation. The city needs answers. On behalf of the people of Lisbon, I am the first person to want everything to be investigated. I asked the president of Caris not only to open an internal investigation last night, but also an external independent investigation, which will ascertain all responsibilities in the shortest possible time.
Now let's take a look at some of the other stories that are making the headlines today. A US court has ruled that the Trump administration's decision to freeze more than $2 billion in funding for Harvard University is in fact illegal. A federal judge said that the government violated the Ivy League's free speech rights and didn't follow proper procedures. The administration has claimed that it is withholding funds over the school's supposed failure to protect Jewish students and fostering anti-Semitism on campus. Shein has taken down an online product listing that used the likeness of Luigi Marigione on a model on a t-shirt. Marigione is currently facing a death penalty after being accused of killing a United Healthcare's CEO. The fast fashion giant says it is conducting its own investigation. Italian fashion legend Giorgio Armani has died at the age of 91. The company announced the news earlier today. Armani was considered the face of modern Italian style and built a fashion empire, turning over billions each year. He had been sick and missed his first ever Milan Men's Fashion Week show in June of this year. The Armani Group says a funeral chamber will open in Milan this weekend, with a private service to follow. And finally, one of the world's biggest icebergs is quickly breaking up into large chunks. That's according to scientists from the British Antarctic Survey. The A23A iceberg previously weighed about 1 trillion metric tons and spanned a whopping 3,672 square kilometres. To our next story, the UK's Deputy Prime Minister is fighting for her political future, and there are calls for her to resign after she admitted that she underpaid tax on a flat. Angela Rayner, who is also the Housing Secretary, has denied that she tried to dodge paying extra tax and called the error a mistake based on legal advice that she received at the time. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has backed the Deputy, but an investigation by his standards advisor into whether she broke ministerial rules is currently ongoing. Now, for more on this story, we're joined by former Labour Party official Richard Parris-Saeed. Richard, thank you for joining us. First of all, how serious is this stamp duty issue for Angela Rayner, politically speaking at least?
It's enormously serious. It definitely could be the end of her her career, or at least a very major bump in that career. She is helped by the fact that she is a deputy leader of the Labour Party in her own right. Sir Keir Starmer can't take that away from her, but he could take away from her the fact that she's Deputy Prime Minister and Housing Secretary. So it's a big worry for her. I think she's made an honest mistake. That's my kind of judgment on the basis of what I know of her personally, and also, from looking at the reports that we've seen. But it's a big worry for her and her team.
Now, she, as you said, has admitted the mistake. She's denied any wrongdoing. Is that going to be enough, you think, to hold on to her position?
So it all really does depend on what this independent standards advisor says. He's got a pretty good record in Westminster. He's respected across the political spectrum. So, he has previously forced more junior ministers from this Labour government to resign from their posts because they were considered to have broken various rules. So, if his judgment on Angela Rayner goes against her, then I think she's in trouble. But if it doesn't, then she will live to fight another day.
Well, Keir Starmer, other cabinet ministers also standing behind Angela Rayner on this. But this is supposed to be the party who said, well, we're going to weed out this kind of behaviour. So how strong really is that support?
So it's kind of hard to know, right? I think with regards to this thing about, being the politically clean party, all parties promise it and then all parties fail. I would say that, I'm a partisan for the Labour Party, of course, but I would say that I think Starmer's got a pretty good record of kicking people out if the standards advisor or whoever finds against them. That's not something that could be said equally of, for instance, his predecessor, Boris Johnson, who ultimately got pushed out by his own party because he defended Conservative ministers and MPs who had broken the rules. There is a question about how much political support Sir Keir Starmer really wants to give Angela Rayner. She is seen as being one of the strongest challengers to his leadership. She's also coming at him from the left ideologically and is putting pressure on him in policy terms. She's advocated for a wealth tax of some sort. She's very much pushing very hard on workers' rights as part of this government's agenda, which isn't something that all of his allies want to do. But so far, he seems to be backing her up pretty strongly.
But taking aside from that, the backing of Keir Starmer or not, surely the optics make it a little bit difficult for sympathy from the public, at least. The housing minister bending the rules somewhat like this doesn't paint a great picture.
The optics are very bad, and I think that you have to see this in terms of Britain has a very, very right-wing media, of course, and they hate Angela Rayner, right? She's the person who's pushing for strong workers' rights from day one of employment here in the UK. She's always backed our trade unions. Well, most of the time she's backed our trade unions. She's the person who's pushing hardest for 1.5 million council homes to be built here in the UK. So, she's seen as being a leading light of at least the soft left, as we call it. Therefore, she is always going to be very aggressively criticised by the British media. But then again, she's got enormous support amongst the Labour Party's membership, the Labour Party's parliamentary party, its MPs. And also, actually, if you look at which Labour senior politicians, just Labour voters more generally, support and like, she's very high up that list. So I think in many ways, she's still an electoral asset.
We still can see how people might think, and certainly the Conservatives, given the fact that in 2023, Nadhim Zahawi, she was quite vocal on his wrongdoings, as it was seen at the time. So the Conservatives now say that her position is untenable. Is there traction potentially with that line, do you think?
So yes and no. Yes, there's traction because there was this very specific thing where she called for him to resign on the basis of him having paid the wrong amount of tax after having been given what appears to have been incorrect advice, and indeed she called for him to resign before the ministerial advisor on standards, this ethics watchdog, had made a decision about how bad they thought his behavior had been. So that's the argument against her. The argument for her is that her case and Nadim Zahawi's are very, very different. She's done two things, right? She's put her share of ownership of a house in a trust. That's in order to protect it for her disabled son so that he'll have security as he grows older. And then she's done a second thing, which is pay a certain amount of stamp duty on a second home, which turns out to have been the wrong amount. And she did that after getting the wrong advice, she says, and I believe her. Nadim Zahawi did something pretty fundamentally different. He founded and owned a company, a very successful company. He made millions of pounds from selling it. He put that into an offshore account for no reason other than avoiding the tax on it. Then the ownership of those funds, I think I'm getting the detail right here, was transferred between him and different family members over several years, again, apparently with no reason other than avoiding the tax. Her case and his just look very different, I think, once you look at the detail.
I guess the argument would be that avoidance is avoidance regardless of what the bigger picture is with that, and I think that may be what the public probably are looking at, and then it depends on what the standards advisor finds as well. And the question is, Richard, if the standards advisor does find against her, is her position untenable? Will Angela Rayner really have to go?
I actually think she would want to. I think that the kind of sensible thing politically in that kind of situation is to hold your hands up, say sorry, have a period of time showing that you've understood that you've got something wrong, and then that means you can come back from it. That tends to be the pattern in British politics. But obviously she's hoping, and those of us like me who support her are really hoping that he won't find against her.
Well, Richard Parasite, thank you so much for joining us on W News. Now, there's speculation over the state of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's health following apparent efforts to conceal clues about it. That's after a video emerged of staff wiping down pretty much anything the North Korean leader might have touched during his visit to Beijing to join China's Grand Military Parade earlier this week. Frank Smith has this report from Seoul.
The budding friendship between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin was on full display in Beijing. In their meeting in the Chinese capital, Kim vowed full support for Russia in its war against Ukraine.
As I mentioned to you during our previous meeting, if there is any way we can assist Russia, we will certainly do it as fraternal duty. We will spare no effort in providing help to Russia.
Despite the brotherly affection, video has emerged showing meticulous measures to conceal clues about Kim's health. The clip, posted by a Russian journalist on social media, shows North Korean staff carefully wiping down the arms and back of the chair Kim sat on during talks with Putin, his drinking glass also removed. Reports also say the armored train Kim rode to China for the military parade is equipped with its own private lavatory designed to prevent any biometric data leak that might give hints about his physical condition. That, according to South Korean and other intelligence agencies. This isn't the first time these sorts of protocols have been in place and are designed to prevent foreign intelligence from getting hold of Chairman Kim's biological samples for testing and analysis. That even applies to agencies from countries with friendly relations with North Korea. Analysts have long speculated over the possible health problems Kim faces. Recent reports say Kim is putting on weight and may be struggling with high blood pressure and diabetes. It also comes after the North Korean leader brought his teenage daughter, Kim Joo-ae, to Beijing this week in her first public outing overseas. It's fueled speculation she may be successor to the Kim family dynastic rule over the nuclear-armed state.
For North Korean citizens, seeing UI's exposure expand from within the country to overseas will likely reinforce the perception that she's almost certainly moving toward becoming the successor.
Details about Kim Joo-a's age aren't clear, although reports suggest she may be around 13 years old. Officially, she can't be designated as successor in North Korea until she turns 20. But analysts aren't ruling out her father putting aside that rule to formally appoint her as early as the 9th Party Congress in January next year. Frank Smith, Al Arabiya English, Seoul.
India has cut taxes on hundreds of goods in a bid to reduce the potential impact from US tariffs. Food items, school supplies and insurance are all set to become cheaper, but experts say the slashed taxes could actually lead to revenue losses of up to $6 billion for the government. For more on this story, we're joined by economist Laurie Laird. Laurie, thanks for joining us. Are you surprised that India has done this, and will it have an overall impact on its economy, do you think?
I'm not terribly surprised. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has talked about sort of streamlining the GST, the goods and services tax. And a lot of people, a lot of outsiders and insiders think that the establishment of this GST is one of his greatest accomplishments in office. It replaced, 8 years ago, it replaced the whole series of state-by-state taxes. It made doing business across state lines in India very, very difficult. So the introduction of this tax was hailed across the world. There were 4 tranches, 4 different tax bands. He has now cut that to 2. Now, he has been talking about that for a while, but the extent to which the things that are going into the lower tax band is a little bit surprising. And it does feel like an attempt to get the Indian consumer spending and perhaps replace some of the activity that's lost to those trumps applied by Donald Trump.
Let's look at the bigger picture here. Can India really retaliate against Trump's 50% tariffs, or is that impossible?
I mean, there are certain things India can do. I think that countries that have attempted to retaliate against the U.S. by imposing or putting tariffs on U.S. goods have not lived to tell the tale, right? They have been punished greatly. And Donald Trump and his team have said, well, okay, we're going to give some, this country or that country a break because they haven't retaliated. So I don't think India will go down that way. Certainly hasn't been any discussion of doing that. India is not a huge trading economy anyway. And that's one reason why these tariffs are probably not going to hurt the Indian economy that much. About 60% of Indian GDP comes from consumption, which is much, much higher than most developing economies. What India could do, though, is make it a lot harder for U.S. companies to set up in India. And it's already pretty difficult. But with India being the most populous country in the world and having a growing middle class, a lot of U.S., particularly consumer goods companies, are salivating about the prospects of setting up in India. India has a record of sort of changing the tax laws retroactively on a number of companies. Vodafone, for one, the UK telecoms company, got really caught up in a changing tax law, ended up going to court and having to pay a lot of back taxes that they didn't expect. That's the sort of thing that India could do to frustrate the U.S., to make it much more difficult for big U.S. companies to set up shop there.
Laurie, let's stay with Trump's tariffs for a moment, if we may. The president has asked the Supreme Council to save his emergency tariffs. How do you think and how do you envisage that playing out?
Yeah, this is an interesting story. It's not entirely unexpected, right? Donald Trump loves his litigation. And this follows a ruling last week that an appeals court said that that Donald Trump overstepped his powers by declaring an economic emergency to impose these tariffs. And, there is a little bit of cognitive dissonance going on here. We've heard Donald Trump on many occasions say the U.S. is the hottest economy in the world, right? So it's sort of difficult to square that with the fact that America is facing an economic emergency because of its trade deficit. So those two things can't really be true at the same time, can they? I don't think that this will get in the way of imposing these tariffs or extending these tariffs. I think Donald Trump will probably just find another aspect of trade law that he can use to categorize his tariffs. And not all of the tariffs have been imposed under these emergency powers. There are other bits of trade law, things to do with national security, that he may be able to dust off to keep these tariffs in place.
Let's talk about Donald Trump's pick for the new Fed governor. Of course, that will be pending the outcome of Lisa Cook and her case with President Trump to find out about her illegal firing, allegedly. He's testifying in front of a congressional committee today, but what can we expect from this? Is he going to get a bit of a grilling, do you think?
Oh, he really did. It's Stephen Myron, who is currently Donald Trump's chief economist. He faced the Senate Finance Committee today, and he did get a grilling, or at least from the Democrats on the committee. And it started out with Elizabeth Warren, who formerly has run for president, and she made it very clear that she did not believe that Myron could be independent of Trump. And she started her questioning by saying, okay, Dr. Myron, do you think that Donald Trump won the 2020 election? And she couldn't get a straight answer out of him. And her conclusion was that this man cannot be separated from Donald Trump. Other Democrats pointed out that Mr. Myron's appointment is only for a very short period of time. He's been appointed to fill the shoes of a governor called Adriana Kugler, who left quite abruptly. Her term was meant to end early next year, so this would only be a 4-month appointment. And a number of Democrats pointed out that Dr. Myron has pledged to take a leave of absence from his current role as the chief economist of the White House to fill that Fed role for a couple of months. And the conclusion that the Democrats came to was, if you don't do Donald Trump's bidding while you're at the Fed, how can you expect to walk back into your former job, which is being the chief economist for Donald Trump? And he really didn't have an answer for that, but it was really fascinating stuff. One thing we don't know quite yet is whether this confirmation process will be concluded before the Fed's next meeting, which starts on the 16th of September. Republicans in Congress would love to hurry this through. Whether they have the votes to do this is not entirely clear at the moment.
Surely this is one of the kind of the key messages that we've seen throughout this administration, is having as many fingers in as many pies as possible, politically speaking. And for Trump, this is the dream, to have one of his own on the inside.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Lisa Cook as well. It's not clear whether she's another Fed governor. There are 7 of them who vote on interest rates. It's not clear what will happen with her, although the mortgage official who initially accused her of some kind of mortgage fraud has said that he earlier today said he does think that she will be indicted. A criminal probe has been opened. We're not quite clear how this is going to play out, but it is concerning because there are 2 members of that 7 strong board of governors who have supported lower interest rates. The other 5 have voted with Chair Powell, but there is also 5 others who vote on interest rates. These are comprised of the heads of regional Federal Reserve banks, which are dotted across the country. Now, all of those presidents, their terms come up for renewal at the end of February next year. If Trump is able to get a majority on the Board of Governors, they can in turn pick friendly or essentially deny the appointments of independent-minded regional heads of Fed banks. It's a little complicated, but in short, it means that Donald Trump has a reasonable chance of putting a majority, of handpicking a majority of Fed governors, giving him control of interest rates. It's a little bit concerning.
Indeed, yet another busy day in Washington, but Laurie Laird there, and we mustn't leave it. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, let's take a look at the top business news for today. American Eagle stocks have jumped by about 25%. The clothing brand says its campaign with actress Sydney Sweeney helped bring in new customers and boost their sales. The retailer, which just signed a deal with athlete Travis Kelce, has recently struggled with merchandising mistakes and with tariffs as well. A US court has told Google to pay $425 million for collecting users' data, even though they had turned off trafficking features. The ruling covers around 98 million users and 174 million devices. Google says it will appeal this decision. And turning to sport now, the 2025 NFL season kicks off today as the defending Super Bowl champions, the Philadelphia Eagles, play host to the Dallas Cowboys. The next game of the season is going to be tomorrow as the league returns to Sao Paulo in Brazil for a second Starlight season. And finally, the largest online football piracy network in the world, Stream East, has been shut down. Last year, the website recorded more than 1.6 billion visits. Stream East has offered users unauthorized access to matches across Europe's top football leagues. And a final reminder of our top stories. French President Emmanuel Macron says security guarantees for Ukraine are ready. That's following a crucial coalition of the willing meeting with Zelenskyy in Paris. The number of people killed in a funicular tram crash in Lisbon rises to 16 as Portugal declares a day of mourning, and Lisbon's mayor says the city needs answers. Plus, pressure on the UK's Deputy Prime Minister to resign mounts over a tax error as she fights for her political future. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. As always, you can follow us on X. The Riz Khan Show is on the way next, and we're back in just a couple of hours with W News Extra. But for now, goodbye.